How is everything going? Very exciting times right now. You must be
It's a very
busy.
exciting time.
Your publicist tells me you were very busy.
Helter Skelter. It's amazing.
Well, I can't wait to get into it. So episode 61 of our podcast launches right after this chat. Bevy, we're talking about, we've got some questions from you guys, and we're also talking about Bevelations, Bevy's first and new book. I have the softcover version.
You'll get the proper version.
Thank you. I need it. Bevy knows what I think of her book. It's going to be a huge hit. It's spectacularly written, as I've said. I like to say that it's part self-help. It's part teaching people how to build their personal brand. It's part storytelling, some amazing storytelling. And it's partly about your quest for a creative life, which we love. Yes. I love. So listen to episode 61 of Story and Rain Talks for a lot more behind the book and the creative life of Bevy A to Z. Bevy is going to read some of my favorite parts of the book, and we'll discuss, and then in between we're going to take some questions from fans and followers.
The Q and the A. Now, is this lighting okay? Can you guys see me?
Guys, hey you, Mindy.
Oh my God, hey you, Mindy.
Hey you, Mindy. Yeah, I can see you. I think you look great.
Okay, it's a good light because came over. My creative team came over and actually did the lighting. But for me, I can't see myself really good.
Oh, well.
But as long as I look good to you, that's counts more.
You look really good. There's all sorts of purple in the background. There's books in the background. You look radiant. Why don't we get into it? Why don't we start with the first excerpt that I want you to read? It's on pages 8 and 9 of the book. I think this gives a really good intro to everything. It gives a really good kind of overview for what's to come. So starting with, however, for every genuine.
Okay, gotcha.
And then to resignation.
Okay, so this is the chapter called Evolution of a Grown-Ass Woman. However, for every genuine connection, there were 10 forced relationships with snobs, insecure mean girls, and needy people who thought I was some kind of magical Negro who could advise them on everything from their love life to their career. Their brand of self-absorption and obliviousness began to wear on my nerves. I was frazzled. But it wasn't only being in service to clients that wore my smile down to a grimace. Ultimately, I was exhausted from being in service to the persona I had created for myself. When I finally came to the realization that continuing to go down this path meant perhaps never knowing where the character ended and the real me began, I knew I had to tender my resignation. I bet you're reading this right now and thinking, I'd love to have those kind of problems. That's what you think until you meet a woman like the one I was. Better yet, try working for one of us. And you'll be like, too short. Better yet, you'll be like, too short. And your favorite word will be biatch. It's not entirely our fault that we get so caught up in playing the role of a tough woman. We've been hardened by years of climbing the corporate ladder and watching mediocre men sprint ahead simply because of what swung between their legs, or in the case of many power-hungry men, barely dangled. Women often feel they have to take on a tough exterior. This often alienates everyone around them, especially those of us who try to get close. For many women, everyone is a competition, even our friends and subordinates. Just like those objects in the rear view, in the side view mirror, looking farther away than they really are, tough women often appear more secure than they really are. But when you get up on us, often the most powerful, aloof, unbothered by what anyone thinks or says among us are masking insecurities. That's me. I'm us, or at least I was. Many folks thought I was prescient because I got out of magazine publishing before the glamorous perks were cut off. Here's the part where I should say, yes, that's right. I saw the fall coming. But that wouldn't be true. And writing a memoir is tricky enough regarding your truth versus their truth, versus the real truth, without complicating it with blatant untruths, aka lies. No, my reasons for getting out were different. Frankly, I witnessed that lifestyle up close, and it scared me. I was on a career trajectory ascending rapidly, and I realized that very few people at the top of the heap were actually happy. Yes, they had everything, all the adoring fans, the not so adoring teams, the perks, but many of them were miserable. In the early 2000s, I had a few friends who quit fashion. I was especially inspired by the PR fashion girl who became a yogi and the luxury marketer who quit to travel the world. Their stories inspired me, but I thought it was easy for them. They were young and thin and white. And if their thing didn't work out, well, the fashion world would welcome them back with open arms and free samples. Well, that wasn't my story. Then one day I realized that while I wasn't young, white, or sample size, I was smart, black, and savvy. And that too had a real value. So I woke the fuck up. I lived this story. You want to hear it? Here it goes.
So that's essentially the beginning, Bevy, of Bevy's book. You talk a lot about personas in this book. You know, you talk about how when back in your days as an advertising and fashion executive, that you were kind of like straddling lots of lines, right? You had this uptown life of friends and family, and then you kind of had, your advertising life, and how you sort of, you fashion life, the fashion girl life, you give name. Tell us some of the names for your personas, because you've actually named some of these personas.
Yeah. Well, Big Bev from Uptown was the queen of hip hop, hanging out. Like, that was the consummate party girl, Big Bev from Uptown.
Right.
And she was the girl that hung out with Tupac because Biggie introduced her to Tupac. She was a girl that, Puffy had to have at every single one of his parties because I was a party starter. I had a lot of influence and carte blanche in the hip hop arena in the 90s and even into the 2000s. I was very much the gal on the scene. And then, of course, there was also my favorite, Lulu Brown Bevy, and that's who I am at the core of me. Lulu Brown Bevy got shunted away when I was around 13 years old because I was a nerdy girl and I was being bullied a lot. And Lulu Brown Bevy was curious and adventurous and empathetic and a ferocious reader. And she was ripe for the picking of a bully. And growing up in Harlem, what I found is that Lulu Brown Bevy, her persona was not valued. And she actually was a target. And so I had to find a way out of that. And so I put Lulu Brown Bevy away on a shelf for a very long time.
Yes.
And it did not reemerge until really I was like around 33 when I had the epiphany that I really wanted to change my life. And then, of course, there was Beverly Smith, fashion advertising professional, and that was the high-flying Paris, Milan, front row fashion shows, perks,
yep.
town car, all the extravaganzas, like when we connected.
Yep.
So that was that girl. And then there's Bevy Smith, the media personality. But at the core of all of it is Lulu Brown Bevy. And I'm so happy that she's reemerged and taken her place of prominence because she is the best part of me.
She's reemerged, and I feel like with this book and the path that you are on now, she's connecting the dots to all of it.
Yeah.
Right? I had a question. I think first of all, I think a lot of people wouldn't have imagined that you were kind of nerdy and the bullied girl. I think a lot of people would be, will find that interesting, would never think that that was you. One of the other things that I think a lot of people don't know is that you wrote this book while you had COVID, right? And you had a family member that had COVID. So actually a friend of mine, Jen, wanted to ask this question. Tamara told me that you had to write the book while you had COVID and your father passed away due to COVID. And during this tumultuous year, you had to write this book. How often did you have to put the book aside? Did the difficulty you were experiencing bring you ideas and thoughts, or did it impede your process?
Well, I had written the book, but I was in the final edits. So
yes, you can tell. You can see it at the end of the book. Yeah.
Yeah. I get the final edits, and it's like, you know, they give me a really strict deadline. So they give me the final edits at the top of March, and they give me this deadline, and they're like, you know, by like April 15th or so, you have to have the book in with all your edits. Well, around March 13th, I contract COVID, and I know that I have COVID because I'm like, I don't feel good. Something isn't right. Like, because I'm not a girl who gets the flu. I don't really get colds and
Right.
things like that. So I was just like, something isn't right. And so I started shying away from my friends. New York closed up on March the 13th.
It did. I remember.
Friday the 13th. So very apropos. But I was just like, something isn't right. So I'm like, I shy away from my friends because I don't want to contaminate anyone. And at that time, you know, I don't know if people remember, but you could not get a COVID test at that time.
No.
It was virtually impossible. And they were telling you, do not come to the hospital unless you're actually dying.
Right, you
like,
couldn't get a
don't wanna
COVID
see
test,
you.
nor were you supposed to set foot in a hospital if you could help it. Yeah.
Yeah, they just didn't want to see you. So it was a very scary time. And so I had to pull some strings to actually even get tested. And I got tested, I think, on the 22nd of March, and then it came back, yes, I had COVID. It's positive. And so when that happened, obviously, I'm scared to death. This is still a very new disease at this point. So they don't get, like, now they know so much more about COVID and the way to treat it. Because remember when it first started, it was all about the ventilator. And then they started to realize the ventilator was actually killing people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, they didn't know that you lay people on their side. They
Right.
didn't know you rub people's backs. Like, they didn't know so much that they know now.
Right.
And so it was a very scary time to have COVID and to live alone and have COVID. It took me about 3 weeks to come out of it, where I was like feeling much better. And that was maybe towards the end of the first week of April. And then my dad got sick. Like, I would say like the top of the second week of April. And then my dad like passed away on the 11th of April. So I had just recovered. And then my dad got sick, and then he passed away subsequently. And it was just like, you know, it was surreal.
You were putting finishing touches on the book. Did it help to be going through so much, or
No,
did
it didn't help.
did you have to take a break?
It didn't help. Yeah, my publicist and my best friend, Amy Morris, stepped in and let my team at my publisher, Henry Holt, know that I was suffering from having COVID and that my dad had passed away, and so that the book was going to be halted. And then I got back to the book, though, in March, and then I took on the task of the edit, but I also wrote to them and I said, guys, you know, my dad passed, and as you know, he was such a very important part of my life. I could not do this book without giving him a chapter. And they were gracious enough to say, yes, of course we understand. And then also at the same time, George Floyd was killed. And I said, I have to mention Mr. Floyd's murder. And they said, of course. And so I was able to add chapters to the book.
And I love those chapters that you added at the end. I think they really round out the book. Kim wants to know, how long have you been thinking about writing a book?
Well, honestly, I'm sorry, who asked that?
Kim is asking, how
Kim.
long have you been thinking about writing a book? Or
Kim, I got to tell you honestly, Angel, you know, I'm old school. So for me, I grew up reading books, biographies by people that were really elderly. Like, you know, in my era, people that wrote biographies and memoirs were people that were like 80, 90 years old. You know what I mean? And so
that's very true.
I never thought about writing a memoir so early in life.
Yeah.
But what I realized is that from social media, so many people wanted to know my story. They wanted to understand my career trajectory, and they wanted to just kind of glean some kind of knowledge as to how I was able to change my life so drastically. And at such an age, you know, TV is a youth culture kind of space.
Yeah.
And so for me to be able to change my life at the age of 38 was really kind of inspiring to folks. And so it was really due to folks saying to me, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? Including my agent. At the time I was with CAA, and my agent said, Bevy, you have to write this book. And she sat me down, and we wrote a one-page synopsis, and then we went out and we sold it. It was really
there's a lot to learn from in this book. Let's go to page 15. The bottom of page 15, if we're both looking at the same paging. However, I believe many people, right at the bottom.
Okay. However, I believe many people who work in fashion are suffering from imposter syndrome and are judging themselves far more harshly than they judge consumers. We buy into playing the role, the morose fashion designer. He doesn't speak, the clothes speak for him. The fashion editor, eccentric diva, arrogant, prone to histrionics. The fashionista works in fashion but isn't a creative, has a powerful job in PR or marketing, is often the daughter of, spouse of, or is a scrappy upstart who clawed their way to the middle / top and is in service to the aforementioned personalities. That would be me. Each role comes with its own set of challenges, but the one thing they all have in common is a fear of not fitting sample sizes, not fitting in, and hearing Heidi Klum say, either you're in or you're out, and you're out. Heavy is the head that wears a Philip Treacy crown. Listen.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great excerpt from the book. Is there anything that you think about, or we have a question here from Cleo. Is there anything that you miss about working in fashion? I think on the podcast I asked you some semblance of the same question. I think I asked you if you would ever work at a magazine again. But Cleo wants to know, is there anything that you miss about working in fashion?
No, Cleo, there's nothing that I miss about working in fashion, because ultimately I will always have a place in fashion. I have a relationship with so many people that work in fashion. Until those people die off, I will always be able to get into a showroom. I will always be able to have access to fashion. So I don't miss fashion in that way at all. And I got to tell you, being away from it, but yet still being of it, because I do fashion commentary on GMA or Wendy Williams and different things or my Bravo show, Fashion Queens. So I'm still a part of fashion in that way, and that's more of a fashion commentary space. So that fulfills that need that I have to be a part of the scene. But I do not miss the grind of, leaving New York and then going to Florence and then going to Milan and then going to Paris. And you're away for 3 weeks at a time. And the first week you get there and it's really great because you're like, oh, that's high. And Tamara, that by the time you get to like Milan, if you've done like London and stuff, like you're over it.
Yeah, those covering Fashion Week, city upon city is really tiring. Covering one fashion week is tiring. I covered Paris for many years.
Yeah.
And my trips to Paris, that's all. I covered New York and Paris. So the only city I traveled for was Paris. And even Paris on its own was a lot because I would be there almost for 2 weeks between going to the actual shows, going to Reese's, covering other fashion, covering trade shows, having dinners, having meetings. It's just covering one city alone. I mean, this sounds crazy to be complaining about something like this.
It does sound crazy. It does. And I'm so glad that you brought that up. It sounds bonkers because people would die for that. And
at the same time, I loved it. You loved it too. We loved it, right? But
I loved it until I didn't, though, right?
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I feel like I did the right thing by moving out of the way. So there's some young person who really had the passion still in them and who wanted to travel and be away from their family for a month at a time because they were
That's
going
right.
to the fashion shows. Many of the fashion shows that they didn't want to even attend. Because let's be honest, there's not 4 weeks of fucking fashion shows that you really want to look at.
No.
Okay? There's not. And you know, and there's certainly not, you know, the obligation of doing the dinners, and you know, you go to a show and you hate everything, but you still have to go to the receipt.
Yes.
You know, all that kind of stuff is like, I know it sounds silly. It's like high class problems to have. So again, we realize how ridiculous it sounds, but still in all, it can become a grind, and it can become too much, and it can weigh on your spirit and your soul, and you could want to take a bow and open up the space for someone who would really enjoy that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you sort of on that same in that same premise is one of the things that you say in the book, which I thought was pretty fabulous, was like, you know, as I was climbing to the top, I always made sure to leave a ladder for someone else.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of people, particularly in the industry that we're speaking of, don't necessarily feel that way or have that point of view, but you mentioned that in the book. You mentioned climbing the ladder and then leaving that ladder there for someone else. So that's another reason why anyone who's looking to do some soul searching or wants some insight or some inspiration about their career, that's another great reason to read Bevelations. Talk a little bit about imposter syndrome, which is mentioned in that paragraph. Tell everyone what you mean.
You know, I didn't necessarily suffer from imposter syndrome.
No, you said a lot of people in fashion do. And
Yeah,
I want you to explain what that means.
Yeah, I mean, you know, listen. You would some of the meanest people and some of the people with the harshest critiques of everyone, you would, like, their parents would come to town and they would be like incredibly normal people. And these people would have put on these airs and, oh darling, and, ooh, what, ooh. And then their parents would come to town and it would be like nice and Midwestern, middle class suburban people.
Yeah.
You'd be like, well, where's that accent coming from? Where are these airs coming from? It would just be like such a movie.
Yes.
And I think that fashion brings out the insecurities in most people. It's a tough industry to navigate.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are people in it that are so mean-spirited. That's the reason why I think you do have so many mean-spirited people in fashion. There's a whole group of people who feel like, you know, they should torture their assistants or underlings or people that work for them in the support team because they were tortured, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because if you were tortured, you would think that they would be like, okay, well, I don't want to do to someone else that was done to me. But many people feel like that's a rite of passage. And I think that that's just a mean-spirited insecurity play. And I think that oftentimes people in fashion feel like they're going to be found out.
I've always said that fashion does attract a lot of people. You and I are New Yorkers, right? Like, you know, Queens, Manhattan, you know, we're New Yorkers through and through. I don't know why that makes a difference, but we have a certain perspective on it. But I've always said that fashion does attract, for better or for worse, a lot of people that are looking to reinvent themselves.
Yes.
You know, they come to the big city and they can shed that persona, you know, or that person they were before they got here.
Yes.
Anyway, speaking of fashion queens, we had a question about fashion queens. Tara wants to know what you appreciate most about your fashion queens co-hosts.
I think what I appreciated most about my fashion queens experience was getting to know Lou. Well, I had a relationship with Deborah J already, and that relationship was really even more solidified from doing a show, because we did it every week and we would be together for hours on hours, and then after we wrapped, we would go out to dinner, and you know, it was a thing. And so we really kind of solidified our relationship. And then I think the second part of it would be that I got to develop a relationship with Miss Lawrence, because initially I did not think that Miss Lawrence and I would get together and be friends or even like each other. I really was hesitant to take the job of Fashion Queens because I did not want to be on a show where I was having an antagonistic relationship with my co-host. You know, and I didn't know anything about Miss Lawrence except that he had been on, he had been on Fashion Queens. I mean, not Fashion Queens. He'd been on the Real Housewives.
Real Housewives, yeah.
And I was very fearful. I was like, well, on that show, they like fuss and fight and don't worry about throwing a drink and dragging somebody's
Yeah,
wig
you're like, I don't
over
want
their
any part of that. Yeah.
I didn't want to be part of that.
Yeah.
And so it was a really pleasant surprise to find that he had none of that in his spirit. He was the sweetest young man, and all he wanted was to really have a connection as well. And so he was the best gift and surprise that I got out of the Fashion Queens.
Yeah. Back to the chiffon trenches. Let's go to page 58, to the bottom of page 58, after Mona Lisa and the Louvre. Let's finish off the rest of that paragraph for us. I want to talk to you about this one. I don't think we got a chance to talk about this on the podcast. We did delve into a bunch of other paragraphs from the book, but this one is a good one.
Okay. I thought that nothing could squash my euphoria over being in Paris. At the Kenzo show, I met the legendary fashion editor, Andre Leontali, for the first time. And I've never forgotten how gracious he was in acknowledging me, a complete stranger, and moving me from a seat in the back to one at the front of the show. An entire set was built to resemble a train station, complete with a smoking locomotive. To this day, I'm spoiled because of my first fabulous Paris Fashion Week experience. I can't abide a pedestrian fashion. I can't. I'm like,
no, I mean, I can't either. And you get spoiled with those kinds of shows that are more theater.
Yeah.
But I have a question. Have you connected with Andre in recent years?
Yeah.
Tell me about the last time you connected with Andre.
The last time I connected with Andre was it was in February of 2020. And Andre goes to church. Well, used to go to church before COVID times. He goes to church in Harlem.
Oh, he does.
And he goes to one of my favorite restaurants. It's one of his favorite restaurants, which is Boulevard Bistro. And I came into Boulevard Bistro for a brunch, and the owner called us Sweps and said, Andre's over there. I said, where? And I went over, and he was like, oh, Bevy, darling, there's a fabulous video that I'm actually going to post during my time of promoting Revelations, of me and Andre running into each other at Fred's at Barney's, God rest the dead. Because wait,
you're talking about Fred's at Barney's? Fred's at Barney's? You're saying
Fred's at Barney's.
Rest in peace, Fred's at Barney's. Rest in peace.
We ran into each other there, and when I tell you, we had the best cackling good time, and we had cake and champagne, and we just carried on. But when I ran into him at Boulevard Bistro, we carried and cackled, and we always have just such a wonderful time together whenever we see each other. And that's been one of the greatest things, to actually develop a relationship with someone who I've long admired, and who I looked up to as just like a mentor in the business. Not because he took me by the hand, but just he led by example.
Yeah.
He made you see it was possible.
Yeah, and it's great to keep those relationships for so many years. Alicia Levette, there's some chatter in the live chat about him being the face of UGG. Did you see that Andre's the face of UGG, and what do you think about that? Have you seen it yet?
Well, I have not seen it, but Andre loves UGGs, so it's actually an authentic brand endorsement. So I'm glad he's getting his coins for something that he actually wears. We did an event together with Dapper Dan in 2020, in 2019, and Andre had on one of his gorgeous Dapper Dan capes, and underneath he had on UGG. So yes, I think it's very authentic and very organic.
I have a question for you. Is there anyone else in fashion that you remember for their kindness? in the way that you remember that moment with Andre?
Oh,
Anyone
there's
else
so
come?
many people.
Does
I've
anyone
been
come to
treated.
mind?
I'm sorry.
Does anyone come to mind?
I mean, there's so many people. My mentor, Kenny Valenti, who has one of the largest collections of vintage clothing on this earth. I mean, he gave me everything. That's the reason why if you see me on the show like Good Morning America, I can talk to you about the history of fashion.
Yes.
That's because
I've been to his place, Bevy. I meant to tell you that. I think it was when I was working at Oprah. I think one of the stylists, I wish I could remember who, one of the stylists or other editors was a huge fan of Kenny's place. And I remember going there and picking out. I mean, it's an incredible archive. And he was someone you worked with early on in your career.
okay, no, actually, he was the boyfriend.
He was the boyfriend of
my
you were a little
boss.
group. You were a little crew, right?
Yeah, and I was like 18 years old, and Kenny Valenti I was an 18-year-old receptionist, and Kenny Valenti would come to visit his boyfriend, who was an art director at an advertising agency, and he would stop and talk to the black girl receptionist because Kenny was from Queens. So
Where's he from in
very
Queens? Hey, Miss Julie. Look, hi, Miss Julie. Where was he from in Queens? I'm curious.
child, you know, I'm a Manhattan person, so Queens, Queens. I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't give you any details on that. But he would stop and chat with the little black girl receptionist because he had grown up in a more diverse environment than anyone that was working at that agency had ever. Like the people that worked at that agency were very white, like old school waspy white.
Right.
And Kenny was not that. And he understood, like he just had this texture and this quality to him. And he just wanted to know who I was, and he wanted to know my story. And once he got to know me, he was the one who advocated for me to be moved from the receptionist desk to be moved into a more, to be groomed and trained for a more executive kind of job.
Which was life-changing for you.
Yeah, it was.
Career-changing and life-changing. Yeah. Let's go to page 66, the bottom of page 66. I love this big comparison, this sort of metaphor that you have with Christian Louboutin shoes and their soles. Let's start at instead of panicking and go to the end of that paragraph on the next page.
Instead of panicking at my impoverished bank account, though, I looked at my closet and I saw dollar signs, specifically in my shoes. One of a kind, fresh off the runway looks, gently worn. That's consignment speak. In my new mindset of needing less stuff, it seemed logical that one of the first sacrifices I should make was my shoe collection. So I sold my soles. No, that's not a typo. I actually sold my shoes, specifically those with that eye-catching red sole. Selling my Louboutins allowed me to pay more than a few bills. That black basic pump that had retailed for $500, well, that pump could be resold for $250. Seeing the resale value of a Louboutin inspired me. Got me thinking about what could I do to become a Louboutin in life? What was my red soul?
And now let's do from witnessing Louboutin's success. Let's read that little bit too.
Okay.
At the bottom of that paragraph, from witnessing.
Oh, yes, okay. From witnessing Louboutin's meteoric success, I knew that you can't come to the table demurely asking for a seat. You have to build a gorgeous throne, bring your red soul to the table, kick up your heels, and watch people clamor.
I have a question for you. Can you talk a little bit about how to figure out what your red soul is? How does one know when they have a red soul to work with, Bevy?
Well, we all have a red soul. We all have something that makes us special and unique that people should buy into. You know, and that's how you become a personal brand. And so for me, I asked myself a couple of questions. Who am I at my core? How am I being perceived? How would I like to be perceived? And those answers gave me kind of a roadmap to developing my personal brand. And what it really came down to for me is that Lulu Brown Bevy is at my core. And Lulu Brown Bevy is an authentic person. And she goes into the world with this sense of wide-eyed wonderment. And so I knew that if I could capture that, if I could take back that power, because there's a certain power in being vulnerable and being like, oh my gosh, really? I've never seen that before. You know, there's value in that. In this world, you know, people think it's very cool to be jaded and everything. No, it's not. It's much better to walk through life like looking at everything like, oh my gosh, like it's the first time you've seen it. You're always discovering something new when you perceive and when you approach life in that way.
Good point. Let's go to page 75, Bevy. Some of you may be reading this. Start there. And then end with dealing with people. But start there. This is interesting. This is a lot of insight into you. So
Which part?
some of you may be reading this and thinking.
Okay. Some of you may be reading this and thinking, who thinks Bevy is bougie? I'm talking about the shady ones who are here to hate read. But hey, as long as you purchase the book, keep going. Here's the thing though, it's all subjective. Some people think I'm bougie based on what they see of my life on social media, especially when it comes to my luxurious vacations. I may not showcase my closet, but I will give you a video of a gorgeous sunrise on the other side of the world. Others may not have that impression based on my work and proximity to celebrities, that I fancy myself a celebrity, which is not true. I know I work with celebrities, but I'm not one. Some mistake my self-confidence for arrogance, and that grates people. It's important as we advance in life to be aware of the signals we're giving when we're dealing with people.
I love that sentence, Bevy.
Yes.
The signals that we're giving, dealing with people. What have you learned about that over the years? The signals.
Yeah, because, you know, I used to be very upset when people didn't know that I had feelings. But I had done such a good job of building up the persona of, you know, Beverly Smith, high-flying fashionista, kicking down doors and taking no shorts, that it was very hard for people to connect with me. So I built this gilded cage. I built it. I had no one to blame. So you know what? I had to tear it down.
Min has a question about being, do you believe there's a downside to being a public figure? I think that was a really interesting question.
I mean, yeah, there's a downside to everything. You know, I think that there's a downside to wanting to be famous, which is not my goal. It never was. I like being a public figure in that I can use my power and my voice for good, you know. Just recently, over the holiday, I decided, along with my friend Melba, to do a fundraiser for restaurant workers that were unemployed, you know, because of all of our restaurants in New York City are shut down except for outdoor dining, which, you know,
It's putting a strain on restaurants for sure.
Put a strain on restaurants. So I called up my friend Melba of Melba's Restaurant and I said, Melba, let's do an après-ski event where we'll sell hot toddies, hot chocolate, the spiked, and we'll give all the proceeds to the restaurant hospitality workers union. And she said yes, but I told her that 2 days prior to the event. So I came up with this idea like on a Thursday, and we did it on a Saturday and on a Sunday. Well, we raised over $14,000. And so many people came to the event because they saw it on my social media.
Yes.
Talk about it on the radio. And so, yes, that's when I love being a public person, because then you can actually help other people. That's the value of it. And, you know, right. And the perks of like being able to get into a restaurant or something, yeah, that's great.
Of course, why not, right? I want to go now to page 125. You also know how to throw an event, let's be honest here. There was brunch with Bevy, right? Brunch
Dinner with Bevy?
Dinner with Bevy.
Yes. Okay, so which part?
Let's go to, I cut off all spending, and to the end of that paragraph, which is one meal.
So 125?
Yep.
Which paragraph is that? Second?
I cut off all spending. It's the second paragraph on that page.
No.
It's not your 125?
No.
It's about the salmon croquettes. It's when you cut off all spending. It's a recipe. We're featuring a recipe of Bevy's on the site this week. Every Friday we post recipes to our recipe box.
Yes.
And
Oh yeah, I now found it.
you found it.
Yeah.
So anyway, every weekend we post, every Saturday we post recipes to our recipe box. And interestingly enough, in Bevy's memoir, there is a recipe she's explaining in great detail.
Yeah.
So we're actually going to feature it on our website. But read a little bit about this. This is from your Broken Blissful chapter, I believe.
Yes.
Where there was a time where you were making a lot of money, and a time when a lot of that money had been spent, and so you had to put yourself on a budget. So take it away.
I cut off all spending. I also put myself on a food budget. I would buy ground turkey meat and make 4 meals out of that one serving. But the culinary feat I'm most proud of is what I was able to do with a can of salmon. That one can was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. In the morning, I'd make salmon croquettes using an egg, onions, Vidalia preferred, but sometimes a yellow onion from the bodega would have to do. Breadcrumbs and Old Bay seasoning. Mix it together, lightly pan fry in olive oil if I was flush. But if I was really down on my luck, good old vegetable oil. And voila, you have 6 hefty salmon cakes. Pair them with eggs for breakfast, French fries for lunch, and a leafy green salad and rice for dinner. A can of salmon will cost you $4. To put that in context, I used to spend $200 on one meal.
Love it. We are going to. There's a couple more questions that I want to go back to. But speaking of this, I mean, let's go here first. You know, you've experienced difficulty this past year. You've experienced difficulty in your career and financially, as you just discussed. And there was this time when you had to put yourself on a budget. So this year has been particularly hard for a lot of people. Can you share what makes you strong and what you think about when you need to pull through?
Wow. I mean, you know, honestly, guys, I have unshakable faith because I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And I know that God, my higher power, has never let me fall. I have never fallen. Like, I've literally never fallen on hard times. Have I had to stretch a can of salmon for for 3 meals? Yes, but that's not. I guess to some people that would be like, oh my gosh,
right?
Touch the pearls. That's like horrible.
But it's not. But it's right.
But in real life, that's not. I went from taking town cars to taking the bus. To some people that might be like, oh my gosh, how low they have fallen. But for me, I just knew it was a part of my story. I just knew it was a part of my career trajectory. I knew that I would write about it in a book and that it would resonate with people. And so even when I was going through it, I just understood that everything is as it should be. That's my mantra. Everything is as it should be. So for me, I look at adversity in life and I say, okay, now why am I going through this? What's the lesson I'm supposed to learn? There's always a lesson you're supposed to learn when you're going through any kind of adversity. Even my dad dying during a pandemic, there will be something. Well, I was thinking about it today with my schedule being bonkers, right? Because I am so very blessed. I've gotten so much press around this book. Yes. Really, like, major press.
Yes.
All the big TV shows. I'm doing all the things. I'm so very fortunate. I'm doing amazing podcasts like yours, that kind of thing. So I feel very fortunate, but it also means I'm not sleeping a lot. It's very grueling. You know what I mean? You know, I ate for the first time really, like I had like a cup of soup for the entire day, and I finally ate at 6 o'clock, you know. But the thing is that I know that it's going to prepare me for my next life, because the book for me, Revelations, Lessons from a Mother, Auntie Bessie, is a culmination of the work that I put in for the last 15 years. It's about to be done. It is done. Tomorrow the book comes out. You guys will hopefully buy the book, and you guys will be contributing to the fact that I get to close that chapter of my life. I did what I set out to do. I wanted to become a media personality, and I did it. And
Yes.
so right now, where I'm sitting at is a place of gratitude. And
Yes.
the space in which I always sit, that's the way I always approach life. So that's what kind of keeps me going. That's what fuels my faith. You know, I know everything is as it should be. And I know I'm blessed and highly favored.
Somebody is just giving a comment about how they attended a dinner with Bevy event and is still learning from that experience.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love
Yes.
my Life with Vision alumni. You know, that's an event that I'm going to bring back in 2020. It was something that I started doing because so many people wanted to know, you know, how I changed my life and all that kind of stuff. And I started doing it because people would email me or text me or, you know, DM me in social media and be like, how did you do it? What's your secret? And I was like, well, I can't tell every single person, but maybe if I get everybody in the room together, I can tell them. And so I would have these really wonderful, intimate events, and you have to answer 3 questions. Who are you at your core? How are you being perceived? How would you like to be perceived? And you would have to answer those before I would accept you. Because what I didn't want was people to come to the event and just want to kind of like be a looky-loo or think they were going to come to the event and, you know, be fabulous. It wasn't about that. Like, I loved everyone that showed up looking incredible. But if you had showed up in, you know, a FUBU sweatsuit and some Converse, it wouldn't have mattered to me, you know?
That's right.
Because it was about your spirit. And so that's why I put people to the test before they even got in the room, because I wanted to make sure that they had the right mind space to be in the room. And so I'm bringing that back.
Exciting. Last question. From Jose? What's it like being? Last question is from Jose. That you're very open on your radio show. What stories or topics can we expect from your book that you haven't shared on the show?
Oh, well,
anything you can point to?
I'm sorry.
Is there anything you can point to that you feel you may not have shared on your radio
There's
show?
some stories that in the book that I've never shared on the radio show.
Yeah, it's incredible.
There's simply not time on the radio show. I'm interviewing celebrities. So
Yeah.
there's not time for me to go on and on about myself and about what I've been through. So yeah, there's a lot of stories in here that people will have never heard before, you know, and that I'm happy to share. If it means that someone else can learn from them, and, you know, as I call it, you know, you can learn from my fucks and fumbles, I'm happy about it, you know?
Yeah. The podcast, episode 61 with Bevy Smith, is live today. It is available on Apple, on Spotify, and more. And the book drops tomorrow, but you can order it today. Thanks, Bevy.
Thank you. And also to your viewers, I would like to say, if you guys buy the book tonight and you send me a DM, I will send you a signed book plate. So if you buy the book tonight on, you know, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, or any local bookstore, and you send me a DM with the receipt, you'll receive a signed book plate. Because as you know, I'm not doing any in-person events, but I am doing a fun event on Wednesday with Bloomingdale's, Titus Burgess from the Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, and from the upcoming Aretha Franklin biopic starring Jennifer Hudson.
Fun.
He's going to be interviewing me about my book.
That's great. That's Wednesday at Bloomingdale's?
Huh?
That's Wednesday at Bloomingdale's?
Wednesday at Bloomingdale's, and all you have to do you can go to my bevysmith.com website, and you can see where to register, because you have to register because it's a Zoom event. So yeah, if you do that, and then there's also a chance to win a VIP Bevy Revelations gift box if you attend the Bloomingdale's event. So you would get the book, you would get a candle, you would get hot chocolate, you get everything to be a snowball bunny with Revelations lessons from my mother.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Check out episode 61, guys, for many more stories behind the book. Bevy, thank you so much.
Thank you, my love. This has been so great.
So fun. Till we meet again. Ciao.
Okay, my love. You have been such a great supporter. Thank you.
I can't say enough about this book, guys. It's great. Go out and get it.
Thank you.